of Princess and Dodi Fayed before that dreadful crash. Even there were photographers anxious to get a picture to sell to the highest bidder. They were taken as they prepared for their flight to Paris. You'll see in a moment Princess Di gets out of the car. You see her talking there to her bodyguard and one or two other people. They then flew on to Paris to carry on their holiday. But of course that holiday was rudely, dramatically and horribly interrupted by that crash in the Mercedes in the tunnel under Paris.
At the tunnel by the Pont d'Alma, Parisians and tourists alike came in droves. Some came simply to stare, but most came in a sort of spontaneous pilgrimage to the road where Princess Diana's car crashed and killed her. They leave behind flowers and small, touching individual expressions of pain and loss. It was here, just after midnight, that a Saturday night out in the City of Lights turned to tragedy. The precise details are still sketchy, but the Mercedes 600 carrying the princess, her Egyptian companion Dodi El Fayed, a driver and a bodyguard, emerged from the tunnel a complete, crumpled wreck. Circumstantial evidence, at least, that the driver lost control while driving at very high speed. According to some reports, at over 100 miles an hour as he sought to escape from several paparazzi, photographers who specialize in following celebrities and who, on this occasion, were chasing the couple on motorbikes. The bikes were impounded and 7 photographers were taken into custody for questioning by the Paris police. They're still being held at the main headquarters. The French capital's emergency services immediately announced Mr. El Fayed and the driver had died, but it took them 2 hours to cut the princess out of the twisted wreckage. Despite massive internal bleeding, they initially managed to revive the princess and had brought her to the nearby Salpêtrière hospital, where she was undergoing surgery when she suffered a heart attack and died. And it was at the hospital that 4 hours after the crash, her death was announced by Bruno Rioux, the doctor that tried to save her life. The princess had arrived in Paris late Saturday afternoon and had dinner with Dodi El Fayed at the Ritz Hotel, which, like Harrods, is owned by Mr. El Fayed's father. Accompanied by one British bodyguard, the couple then set off on their last journey that ended in catastrophe. Given the manner in which the paparazzi chased Princess Diana, this, in the eyes of many observers here, was an accident waiting to happen. But such recriminations will have to wait until after the French police have completed their investigation.
I think the driver drive very fast, and he lost the control of the car. And at this speed, we don't know if the paparazzi can follow the car. And this tunnel is very dangerous. We had about more than, I think, 30 or 40 dead in the last 30 years.
But for the moment, most Parisians don't appear interested in those details, as, also at the hospital, they simply come to pay their respects and make clear their sense of loss. Those tributes and the shock expressed here are but one sign of the impact Princess Diana had outside Britain, in itself a fitting tribute to the woman who during the past 16 years had made herself a unique worldwide celebrity. Arnaud van Linden, Sky News, Paris.
Buckingham Palace has today become almost a memorial to Diana. Thousands have gathered to lay flowers, shed tears and remember the Princess of Wales. Their grief is mixed with disbelief. Sky's Emma Hurd is there.
Tears for the woman described as the people's princess. One by one, they arrived outside Buckingham Palace to express their own personal grief and the grief of a nation. Thousands of bouquets form a floral monument, some elaborate arrangements, others single stems picked from nearby parks. They carry messages of sympathy and loss. Diana, why did you leave us? Diana, you were a saint, now you're in heaven. As the guards at the palace played somber music, some felt unable to hide their emotions, crying out in anguish.
My dearest, my beloved daughter. My dearest, my beloved daughter.
The crowd, which now numbers several thousand, began gathering early this morning. Some had come for a sightseeing trip and then heard the news that Diana, Princess of Wales, was dead. The atmosphere here is one of shock. No one can quite believe she's gone.
It was a shock. I mean, I couldn't believe my ears when I woke up, and I was looking at the news and I just couldn't believe it.
I think the country, I think the whole world has lost a very, very special person that will never be replaced.
I pay her respect to her. I mean, she was just a wonderful woman.
I was really shocked. I couldn't believe it. I thought, I'm just going to wake up in a minute. It's all just a bad dream. So I really came out. I just went for a walk and thought I'd come down here.
The boxer Prince Nassim was among the first people to arrive at the palace. He carried 2 bouquets to lay at the gates. He said he felt too distressed to talk about the princess. Among the grieving adults, children who also wanted to say goodbye. Diana had loved children, and it seems that she had touched their lives too. Emma Hurd, Sky News, Buckingham Palace.
And Emma joins us right now live from Buckingham Palace. And Emma, is it any clearer at this point this afternoon what exactly is going to happen when Prince Charles returns with the princess's body from Paris?
Well, what we understand at this stage is that Prince Charles is due to land in Paris very shortly. He will be bringing back the body of Diana, Princess of Wales, but what will happen then is not quite clear. We understand that the body was due to go to Windsor Castle, but now it's to be taken to a private mortuary.
Emma, a tragic outpouring of grief, as we saw, of course, in your report, but how would you actually sum up at this point the mood of the people there today?
The people here are absolutely stunned. Many of them didn't know the news until they arrived here. There were tourists who just come to sightsee at the palace, and they've been walking around just with glazed expressions on their faces. They don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, so they've stayed here and mourned with the other people who are here. Some other people have come from their homes hundreds of miles away. They heard the news on the radio, on the television, and came here because they thought they wanted to be with other people to grieve for the woman they loved.
You've obviously spoken to a lot of the people there today, Emma. Is it fair to say there's quite a bit of anger perhaps directed towards the press?
There is some anger towards certain sections of the media. There is a feeling that this was inevitable in some ways. Some say you drove her to it. There was such interest in her, such obsession by the media that she was being hounded, they say. But others admit that they were fascinated by her. They wanted to read those stories in the newspaper. They wanted to see those pictures. And so they say, well, we're all to blame.
And no doubt many of them have also got opinions on her relationship with Dodi Fayed.
Well, that's right. I mean, that isn't the main topic of conversation here. What is the topic of conversation is Diana and what she meant to them. But they are saying that Diana was
What about you're the guy that was in the car?
Well, Emma, for the moment, thanks very much indeed.
Now, the pain and shock of Princes William and Harry was clear to see when the boys attended a church service at Balmoral with their father. The Queen Mother, the Duke of York and the Duke of Edinburgh were also at services at Crathy Church.
Prince Charles, flanked by his 2 sons, arrived at Crathy Church just yards from the gates of Balmoral as a sombre crowd looked on. Their appearance was unexpected. Prince Harry looked drawn and pale. They were followed by the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, who joined a special service in memory of the Princess of Wales. Her 2 young sons sat amongst the stunned congregation. Hundreds of local people and tourists gathered to show their support for the grieving royal family and pay their respects to the Princess of Wales.
No words to describe how you feel, just numb.
Measure the days they spent separated. A book, Diana, Her Story by Andrew Morton, revealed details of her unhappiness. She had developed eating disorders and was even reported to have attempted suicide. Eventually, but out of the blue, the then British Prime Minister John Major announced that Diana and Charles would separate. The British monarchy had not faced such a crisis since the abdication of King Edward VIII in 1936. But the princess was not to be deterred from maintaining her high public profile. Once the couple's divorce was confirmed and freed from the shackles of royal protocol, she began to be seen in public with other men. She focused her official life on several charities, as varied as the Royal Ballet in London and the Red Cross campaign against the landmines. Within the past few months, she had been in Angola and Bosnia to see at first-hand the effects of landmines as a guest of the International Red Cross, a stand that courted political controversy. She managed to combine her charitable work with a high-profile social calendar. But it was her liaison with Dodi El Fayed that had seemed to be the most serious since the breakup of her marriage. Tim Lister, CNN, reporting.
British Prime Minister Tony Blair is calling Diana the People's Princess. He says her death has left the nation devastated.
We are today a nation in Britain in a state of shock, in mourning, in grief that is so deeply painful for us. She was a wonderful and a warm human being. Though her own life was often sadly touched by tragedy, she touched the lives of so many others in Britain, throughout the world, with joy and with comfort.
Condolences and tributes to the late princess are pouring in from around the world. In the United States, President Bill Clinton praised Diana's humanitarian work and said his thoughts are with all grieving Britons and most especially with the princess's two sons.
For myself, I will always be glad that I knew the princess, and always think of her in very strong and positive terms, as will Hillary. And we can only hope that her work will go forward, and that everyone who can will support her two fine sons and help them to have the life and the future that she would want.
UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan says Diana's death has robbed the poor, the sick and the weak of one of their most committed champions. Mother Teresa says she is deeply shocked and saddened at the news of Diana's death.
Teresa's sisters have been praying for Diana.
You could see that she was very much concerned about the poor people, and she wanted definitely something by helping me to help them.
Whatever the form national mourning now takes, thousands of people are already remembering the Princess of Wales in their own way. David Loyne, BBC News.
And there'll be a special televised service in St Paul's Cathedral this evening at 6:30. The service is open to members of the public and the doors open at 5:30. I'm joined now by Michael Delanoy, an author who's written extensively about the royal family and constitutional matters. Mr. Delanoy, it's perhaps not the ideal moment to ask, but does the princess's death change things?
I know what you mean about it not being ideal, but this has to be faced. Yes, and it does. I mean, in a terrible kind of way. It removes the problem, if you like, of her possible future remarriage, if she remarried again, who she would she still be a princess and all that bit. It also clears the way, both personally and constitutionally, for the Prince of Wales. Again, it seems very premature, doesn't it, to talk about the possibility of him remarrying. Certainly, obviously not in the immediate wake of the princess's death. He wouldn't dream of it. But, I mean, he is now not a divorcee, he's a widower. And so, although, I think the Archbishop of Canterbury has done quite a lot of agonising as to whether actually he would have been prepared to crown Prince Charles. I mean, all that has been, in a way, sorted out by this horrendous tragedy.
Now to David Rose at Balmoral. David, we know about Prince Charles going to Paris. We heard you talking there about the two young princes. Any news of any other royal movements?
No news, but I think we can gather at least two things for sure. One, there was a huge police and special branch presence earlier today when the royal family went to church. There are no police, or virtually none, around at the moment. Therefore, I think a departure is not imminent. Secondly, I'm sure what will decide how they move, when they move, is the benefit, what are the needs of the two young princes. And one rumour, and it seems to me to make a kind of sense, is that Prince Charles, after escorting the body of his former wife back to England, will come north again to be with his sons, perhaps to bring them to London. But we don't know.
OK, David, thank you very much indeed. David Rose at Balmoral there. Well, Ron Allison, a former press secretary of the Queen, joins us in the studio now. Ronald Allison, we know that Prince Charles is due to arrive with Princess Diana's sisters in Paris pretty soon now. What must be going through their minds?
It's always very difficult to
speculate on what's going through somebody else's mind, but I think it's safe to assume that they'll all be thinking that this is the last journey in the world they ever would wish to have taken. Numbness, sort of the shock and the horror that they will have been feeling since first thing this morning, that perhaps is beginning to wear off, and now reality is bearing in on them. And I mean, as I say, it's always dangerous to put oneself in anybody else's place, but we can just imagine the feelings as they drive to the hospital, and the reality strikes home.
Prince Charles has cut short his holiday in Scotland to bring back to Britain the body of his former wife, the Princess of Wales. He took off from Aberdeen Airport for Paris on a royal jet a short while ago. He was joined on board by Princess Diana's two sisters. They will be met by French President Jacques Chirac on their arrival. Princess Diana had arrived in the French capital last night, having spent a holiday with Dodi Al Fayed on the Italian island of Sardinia. These are the last pictures taken of the Princess of Wales alive on Saturday afternoon, when she boarded the Al Fayed's private jet for Paris. The couple had spent a week cruising the Mediterranean in a yacht, stopping off in the French Côte d'Azur, and later they spent 2 days in the Sardinian port of Portofino.
Perhaps more than any other charitable patron, she made a difference, being prepared to defy prejudice, as in this meeting with AIDS patients in America. Indeed, her famous handshake with an AIDS patient at the Middlesex Hospital in 1987, she single-handedly changed attitudes both here and around the world. It was a concern she maintained throughout her life. She was planning to visit the AIDS charity London Lighthouse later this month.
It would have been a private visit. It would never have got into the papers or onto the television. But she was just going to come and bring a friend who was interested in Lighthouse and sit and talk to some of our service users and staff. And that kind of personal interest is really irreplaceable.
But the relentless media glare, even in this area of her life, took its toll. And following her separation from Prince Charles, she announced she would be scaling down her charitable work.
Over the next few months, I will be seeking a more suitable way of combining a meaningful public role with, hopefully, a more private life.
But the woman who wanted to be known as the Queen of Hearts continued to devote herself to her favourite causes. She brought more than publicity. For someone who was naturally shy, she became adept at putting others at ease.
If you'd seen her walking into a room with a number of old people all around, and she would pick out probably the oldest person in the room, and probably in a way, to our eyes, to camera's eyes, almost the least attractive, and she would go there, the hand would be into that older hand, and she would form a link that no other person in my experience has been able to do.
And she continued to highlight the plight of those who would otherwise be forgotten. When she went to Angola, crusading for a ban on landmines, she courted political controversy and put herself at some risk. Campaigners who'd been trying for years to get something done found governments began to notice at last.
And it wasn't until the Princess became involved at the end of '96 and early '97 with the Angola trip and with a number of other things that suddenly everybody woke up to this problem. And millions of people around the world have now seen her talking about this issue.
As one charity leader put it today, Diana, Princess of Wales, made a genuine difference to people's lives, using her public position and the media to create hope out of despair, and leaving even the most distressed with a sense that someone cared. Neil Dixon, BBC News.
You know, I've picked up on the news wires here in the studio that Prince Charles has arrived at a French military airport just outside Paris, presumably now making his way to the hospital.
Villa Coublay, the name of that airport.
Thanks very much, Nick. Well, the Princess made an immeasurable contribution to good causes around the world, but she was also a world leader in another field. Widely regarded as one of the most beautiful women in the world, her elegance and style made her an icon of the fashion empires. Today, designers and fashion writers join together in their tributes to her. Ben McCarthy reports.
From the moment she appeared in the public eye, Diana was destined to become a fashion icon. At first she was shy and seemed uncomfortable in front of the cameras. But after her fairy tale wedding, in a dress which dazzled the world, Diana became the focus for fashion, with the kind of appeal no supermodel could match.
Many of the designers owe their entire careers to her.
Without doubt.
Without doubt. She was fantastic.
She was the ambassador, when she, as a royal princess, the ambassador for British fashion around the world. And because of that, and because she was dressed beautifully and looked wonderful, buyers from all around the world came to buy from British designers.
And designers knew the world was watching Diana. Her clothes were breathtaking, and sometimes almost daring. But as well as the acclaim, there was criticism. Some frowned on the slicked-back hair she sported at the New York Fashion Awards. But even when she was making mistakes, the followers of fashion adored her.
I don't think we've ever been known as a particularly stylish nation, and she single-handedly rather changed that from, starting as a nursery school teacher, looking, you would never notice what she wore, to being somebody that we cannot take our eyes off her.
In June, Diana parted with many of her dresses at a charity auction in New York. Most will now become museum pieces. It was an act in which her love of fashion combined to help those for whom she cared. Ben McCarthy, ITN.
Just to keep you updated on developments, we're now getting reports that Prince Charles, after landing at a military airport just outside Paris, was driven straight into the centre of Paris without any ceremony. Right, we're joined now by Hilary Alexander, the fashion editor of the Daily Telegraph. Hilary Alexander, we just heard the Emanuels there, who of course designed that famous wedding dress, saying that she was very much an ambassador for British fashion. Is that the way you saw it?
Absolutely. Much of the day's sport has been called off as a mark of respect for Diana. That includes the Premiership match between Liverpool and Newcastle and the games at Crewe and Kilmarnock. Tomorrow's Old Firm derby between Celtic and Rangers has also been postponed. Today's rugby union matches at Newcastle and Saracens are off as well. Rugby league and cricket goes ahead, with one exception. Northamptonshire Cricket Club have gone against the official advice and postponed their game against Durham. They say they have a lot of connections with the Spencer family and everyone at the club is very upset.
Well, let's update you on one of the developments in that story, that tragic story. There's been a lot of attention focused on 7 photographers, paparazzi, who allegedly pursued this vehicle and may have been the cause of the crash. There's a statement just come out from the French police. They say that after questioning the 7 photographers throughout the day, that it's issued a statement which reveals that officers were continuing their investigations and had not yet reached any decision over the future of the men, although we heard earlier on that three of them had been released. The statement added, "It appears at first sight that there was a high-speed accident while the car was being followed by motorcycles. The investigation must determine the role that the photographers could have played in the accident and what their behaviour was at the scene of the scene of the incident." A police spokesman insisted that the investigation was continuing. So clearly there are a lot of I's to be dotted, and we'll bring you up to date whenever we hear of a development in that particular aspect of the story.
Here from Scotland, and he'll shortly be inside the hospital grounds. There he is, arriving, we think, in front of the honour guard provided by President Jacques Chirac, the Garde Républicaine.
James, let's just stay with you for a moment. Do you detect any sense of remorse among the French that it happened in Paris?
A sense of deep shock, certainly. I hope you're able to see now the President greeting the Prince on the steps of the hospital, followed by Sir Michael Jay, Britain's ambassador, a very simple, informal greeting. And now the Prince is going into the hospital, I think, to speak.
Just accompanying them as far as we're aware. Yes, I'm sure that's them there.
guard of honour there. But no formality.
No formality at all. But this was the hospital where there was that desperate attempt to keep Diana alive in the early hours of this morning. Something like 2 hours, it said, were spent trying to prevent Diana, Princess of Wales, from dying from those
and as we were
injuries.
discussing with experts in cardiac problems here, them saying that the French, very, very well equipped, reacted very, very fast, did their very, very best to save her.
Nothing could be done. Quite impossible to imagine anybody surviving that accident, I'm afraid. So there is the Prince of Wales now in the hospital where his former wife died in the early hours of this morning following that road accident.
Okay, Nick, thanks very much indeed.
Just the wires are saying, of course, that this is the saddest day and the saddest mission of Prince Charles's life, and I'm sure, as James has said, that's entirely true.
It is astonishing to realise that she was pronounced dead less than 12 hours ago.
Yes, events have moved on very fast from there. I think there will still be a tremendous shock, really, for the rest of this week around the world and around the country. It was so unexpected. People might have thought many things would happen to the Princess of Wales, but not this.
And the royal family have a reputation for, I think, as Michael Delanoy mentioned, for being not very good at showing their feelings.
Indeed.
If you could speculate about their feelings, what are you going to tell us?
Now that I think they will be acting as any other family. They do have emotions, of course they do. They're not accustomed to showing them in public, but I'm told that in private they are very affectionate and very caring one to the other. It's something to do with a stiff upper lip, if you like, or appearance, that they don't show outward concern for one another. But in private, they do care, and I'm sure they will be sitting at Balmoral deeply shocked. The grandparents now have a very great task on their hands. Prince Charles is in Paris. They have these two bereaved and shocked young men to care for. And as I say, I think they're going to stay there for the night, and then they will presumably be in charge of shepherding them down, bringing them to London, trying to help them rebuild their lives.
And I don't know if you had the chance recently to speak to Buckingham Palace, but presumably we're promised still an announcement about the arrangements. When?
Possibly this evening. As I say, they were hoping to do so once the coffin is brought back sometime after 7 o'clock. It may drift on, may be some ends to tie up, and so it may be tomorrow before we get the full details, but I think it will be certainly within the next 24 hours.
Jenny Bond for the moment, thank you.
Down at Buckingham Palace, Harry Smith pointed out, there was slight irony that people seem to be focusing on Buckingham Palace, given the relations that the Princess had with the Buckingham Palace hierarchy, especially in later years.
Indeed, but still, whatever you say about that, all the ups and downs of Diana's relationship with the royal family, and of course her marriage and subsequent divorce from the Prince of Wales, it is still, when it's all said, the centre of national life.
Nick, thanks very much indeed.
Well, as you've heard, the Prince of Wales is at this moment visiting the hospital in Paris where Diana, Princess of Wales, died in the early hours of this morning from injuries she suffered in a car crash. Her friend Dodi Al-Fayed and the car's driver were also killed in the accident. Prince Charles flew to Paris from Aberdeen along with the Princess's two sisters. He's due to return to Britain this evening with the body of the Princess.
The crash was at high speed and horrific. Just after midnight, the black Mercedes with 4 passengers cannoned into a concrete pillar, then hit the side wall. The impact killed Dodi Al-Fayed immediately, and his driver. The Princess and a member of Dodi's security staff then had to be cut out of the wreckage. The emergency services had arrived quickly. They were reportedly appalled at the scene. It took over an hour to free the Princess, during which time she received emergency treatment. First reports had described her as having arm and thigh injuries and concussion. She was taken to La Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, and at that time the gravity of her condition was not publicly known. She had massive chest injuries and suffered a heart attack shortly after arrival.
malgré la fermeture de cette plaie et un massage cardiaque.
For 2 hours, the doctors tried desperately to save her, but despite their efforts, she died at 4 in the morning. By then, the royal family and both the British and French governments had been informed of the situation. The French Prime Minister led his country's tributes.
Les Français ont toujours été séduits par son charme.
The French have always been captivated by her charm, her personality, her humanity. I also like to extend my sympathies to the people of Britain.
As the news spread, the British ambassador added his words.
The death of the Princess of Wales fills us all with deep shock and with deep grief. And our thoughts and our prayers are with her family and her friends, and with the family and friends of the others who died in the accident.
The Princess of Wales and Dodi Al Fayed had started their evening with dinner at the Ritz Hotel. Photographers, the persistent paparazzi, were outside. So the Mercedes, driver and security man in the front, collected the couple from a rear entrance and headed towards a villa owned by the Al Fayed family across the river. 7 photographers set off in pursuit of the Mercedes. There are several witnesses to the chase into the underpass. All 7 are now in custody. Such paparazzi are a common feature in France, and the princess was probably their most important quarry. Meanwhile, the hospital had been making preparations for the princess's body to be taken home. President Chirac was on hand to greet Prince Charles, who arrived late this afternoon with the 2 sisters of the princess. The site of the accident is a mundane traffic tunnel in the centre of the city. For those who have come to look, there is very little to convey what happened here. Perhaps this has added to the sense of disbelief and shock that is very evident. All day there's been a constant stream to the spot. Tourists, Parisians, travellers, French citizens, Japanese students, American soldiers, British holiday makers. Most could not find words enough to express their emotions. The messages with the flowers were in many languages. From this roadside spot, ripples of grief spread wide. Kate Adie, BBC News, Paris.
The princess's brother, Earl Spencer, said he was profoundly shocked at the news of his sister's death, but he also attacked what he called the intrusive and exploitative media that had pursued Diana, saying he always believed they would kill the princess.
All those who've come into contact with Diana, particularly over the past 17 years, will share my family's grief. She was unique. She understood the most precious needs of human beings, particularly those that suffered. And her vibrancy and sparkle, combined with a very real sense of duty, are now gone forever. It is heartbreaking to lose such a human being, especially when she was only 36. This is not a time for recriminations, but for sadness. However, I would say that I always believed the press would kill her in the end. But not even I could imagine that they would take such a direct hand in her death, as seems to be the case.
And we leave that because the Prince of Wales, it appears, is leaving the hospital in Paris. These are the scenes now.
We are now seeing the Prince of Wales just leaving the hospital, accompanying the body of Diana, Princess of Wales, in a cortege that's starting the long journey home from the hospital here in Paris, first to the military airfield, where a guard provided by the French government will pay homage to Diana, Princess of Wales, as she starts the journey home. But for now, the brief formalities at the hospital are over. The Prince of Wales and the 2 sisters of Diana have said their private farewells here at the hospital, and they have started the long journey back to Britain.
Very little ceremony there, James. The coffin could be glimpsed in a plain blue van-like hearse, and the prince was in the hospital quite a short time.
That's right. There were a few legal formalities that had to be gone through. He, I know, wanted to thank the medical staff for the apparently valiant efforts they had made over several hours, both at the scene, the paramedics, and here at the hospital, to try to save Diana's life. They finally recognised that it was hopeless, although she survived the impact itself. The massive hemorrhaging, the huge damage done to her body could not be repaired. He made his feelings clear to them, apparently, within a few private moments with the doctors and the nursing staff in the intensive care department of the hospital. He also spoke briefly to President Jacques Chirac, but the President recognised that this was no time for long conversation, for more than an expression of condolence on behalf of the whole people of France. That's what the President said he wanted to do by coming here, and he wanted to provide exactly the facilities that the Prince and the sisters of Diana thought appropriate, so that they could, as quickly as possible, start the most unhappy journey home.
James, there were 4 people in the car. 3 of them died. What of the 4th?
Well, we know little of the condition of the bodyguard of Dodi Al-Fayed's personal staff. He was obviously very badly injured. He's still in hospital. He's being treated for his injuries, and of course, as soon as possible, the police will want to interview him as the sole survivor about the exact circumstances and the moments leading up to the terrible crash, precisely why it was that the driver, who of course is now dead, was travelling at great speed into the expressway tunnel. Was he, as many are saying, evading the paparazzi, the freelance photographers, determined to pursue Dodi Al-Fayed and the princess back to Mr. Al-Fayed's Paris apartment? Or was there some other explanation for the crash? Could there be some more innocent explanation? But the public judgment here, ahead of the long judicial inquiry, is that this seems to suggest that they were forced to their death by the attention of people who've been utterly condemned throughout France, the photographers hoping to sell to the highest bidder photographs of the princess and her new and close friend.
So, James, the princess starts her journey back to the United Kingdom. How long will it take the cortege to get to the Villacoublay military airport?
It should be only a matter of perhaps 10 or 15 minutes.
We can see now, James, can I stop you? The pictures recorded a short time ago of the Princess of Wales's coffin being put into the hearse for the journey to Villacoublay, and the Prince of Wales exchanging a few words with very, very tearful members of the hospital staff.
I think that reflects the entire mood here, one of shock and a sense of shared grief with all the people of Britain. The French are horrified, dumbstruck that this terrible tragedy could have been played out on French soil. They had very much taken Diana to their hearts. The President himself said that when he said the French have always been captivated by her charm, and I think he did speak for the nation in that. The French also admired actually a slightly rebel streak, as they saw it in her stand against the establishment, particularly after the breakdown of her marriage, and the fact that they saw her as not being a stuffy member of the court, but somebody who represented, as many of the people who've been paying tribute here today said to me, someone who represented the spirit of the modern age. Of course they found her beautiful, charming, giving, but they also thought that she represented a change of direction in some way in the British monarchy. Whether that's true, this was their judgment in a country which, of course, has very divided views about the usefulness of monarchy, although they have so much admired, in most of the recent past, so much admired our own.
Yeah, the camera obviously staying on.
Camera's snapping around there.
Apparently there were 3 motorcycles with cameramen on the back of them, I was noticing, and even following the convoy from the airport. Whether they might have been semi-official rather than the paparazzi who apparently caused this terrible, terrible disaster.
In the background there, just caught a glimpse there of the white-coated medical team. Prince Charles obviously had a few words with them.
And so away to the airport.
Military airport,
yes.
Northolt. Now this is live picture we are receiving, I believe, just a few moments ago, after they left the hospital. This is making their journey through central Paris. There is the hearse containing the remains of the Princess of Wales. You can see the flag in the back.
As we said, the royal standard. And she wasn't officially...
Prince Charles following close behind.
She wasn't officially a member of the royal family, of course, but was regarded as to be so, as the Queen herself said, and in death certainly regarded so, with that flag draped on that coffin.
The Dean of St Paul's, Dr. John Moses, who will be conducting tonight's service. You're watching BBC Newsroom South East. Princess Diana spent most of her life here in the South East. Her death has been marked across the region, as Joanne Coburn reports.
Flowers have been laid at the gates of Diana's old school in Sevenoaks in Kent. She left Westheath boarding school when she was 16 with no qualifications. She last visited it in 1987. But her connections with the county didn't stop there. As Princess of Wales, she gave her name to a newly formed regiment based at Canterbury, but it was one of the many roles she gave up last year. The news of her death, along with Dodi Al Fayed and his driver, has once again focused attention on the question of press intrusion.
My thoughts are of intense anger that 3 people should have literally been driven to their deaths by the media, by the paparazzi, by the press.
There was also anger at the media from people outside Windsor Castle, where the gates had been closed to visitors. Diana's death seemed to touch everyone in the town, and there were poignant reminders of her on every street corner.
I feel very, very distressed about the press, and I think that she's been harassed all the time.
I think there should be more privacy for the royals. Well, all these sort of stars and all that, why should they be hounded just because they are someone?
This is for the church service only.
A special service was held inside the castle grounds at St George's Chapel, where the princess and her 2 sons occasionally went to church.
We really hope that as many people who feel they'd like to join in our worship will actually come today to our normal services to join us in grieving.
Just a mile away in Windsor Great Park, it was strangely quiet at the Guards Polo Club, where it's reported Diana first met Dodi Al Fayed 10 years ago. Today's matches were cancelled as a mark of respect to the princess and her friend. Joanne Coburn, Newsroom South East, Windsor.
Well, before we go, let's return to Princess Diana's former home at Kensington Gardens and our reporter James Cameron. James, what's happening there?
Well, as you can see, literally thousands of floral tributes have been pouring in all day. I can see balloons here shaped like hearts. I can see teddy bears and, of course, pictures of the princess and thousands of flowers. And you can probably see behind me a whole stream of people adding to the floral tributes that have built up here at Kensington Palace.
As I came in today, I got on the bus and there were many people getting on the bus, clearly the wrong bus for Buckingham Palace, but saying, I just want to get to Buckingham Palace. Clearly many other people felt that Kensington Palace was the place to come.
Well, it's been an extraordinary scene walking around the streets of London here. You've seen people with bunches of flowers in their hands, not really knowing where to go or what to do, how to express their grief. And I think a lot of people feel extremely relieved when they do get here, because there is somewhere where they can actually put their flowers and can actually express some of the sorrow that everyone here in London is quite clearly feeling.
All right, James, thank you very much indeed. We will be back tonight at 10:20.
Good evening. We have some severe weather across northeast England for this evening in the form of heavy rain and thunderstorms. That will continue to affect those areas throughout the whole evening before moving away northwards.
All changes on BBC One. Further news in a moment. Then at 6:30 we go live to St Paul's Cathedral with church leaders of many denominations for a special service to bring the nation together. And at 8 o'clock a tribute to Diana, Princess of Wales, from David Dimbleby. Changes also on BBC Two. At 6:45, Countryfile, and following that at 7:10, a picture of a year in the British countryside. Michael Palin begins his new series at 8 o'clock, a journey around the Pacific Rim, 50,000 miles in 18 countries, in a full circle. Tonight's episode of Full Circle will also be shown again next Sunday evening here on BBC One. In another new series at 8:50, Professor Stephen Hawking's far-reaching view of the universe. The Natural World is at 9:40 and Canterbury is at 10:30. It's the first of 2 Everyman programmes celebrating the cathedral's 1400th anniversary. And after that, the film Ring of Bright Water, the revised line-up for BBC Two. This is BBC One. And now it's time for the news at 6 o'clock with Peter Sissons.
This is BBC Television from London. Diana, Princess of Wales, has died after a car crash in Paris. She was taken to hospital in the early hours of this morning with severe chest injuries. Surgeons tried for 2 hours to save her life, but she died at 3 o'clock this morning, British time. Normal programmes on BBC Television have been suspended while we bring you the latest developments. The Prince of Wales is now on his way back to Britain, escorting home the body of the Princess of Wales. The Prince had travelled to Paris earlier today, accompanied by the Princess's 2 sisters, to collect her body. The Princess died in the early hours of the morning after a car crash which also killed her friend Dodi Al-Fayed. The Prime Minister will be at RAF Northolt in West London this evening to meet the plane carrying Prince Charles and the Princess's body. The royal family has not yet announced arrangements for the Princess's funeral. From Paris, our chief news correspondent Neil Bennett reports.
The Princess's final journey began at the Ritz in Paris, where she'd been having dinner with Dodi Fayed, whose family own the hotel. She was photographed getting into her Mercedes car, and the pursuit by paparazzi then got underway. It was an everyday experience for Diana, and it had become a torment to her. The obsessive press interest extended to anyone linked with her. Dodi Fayed was well aware how much scrutiny they were both under from the media. According to eyewitnesses at the scene, her car was going fast to escape the attentions of the photographers when it crashed. It apparently hit a pillar in a tunnel on one of the through roads running alongside the River Seine. The motorcycle-riding photographers stopped beside the wreckage, the tangled mass of metal, clear evidence of the speed of the impact.
We saw a large blue Mercedes, darker blue, and the airbag on the passenger side was deployed. And we saw a lot of liquid on the ground, and we didn't know who it was at the time. Somebody came running towards us, speaking French, shouting in French, and we thought for some reason it was going to blow up in the tunnel. We stood there, watched a little bit, and police came about 7 to 10 minutes later, ambulance about 15 minutes later.
Although Mr. Fayed and the driver were killed outright, the Princess and her bodyguard were taken to hospital, where surgeons fought in vain to save Diana's life. Doctors said she'd had massive chest injuries and suffered a heart attack. Our ambassador in Paris was the first to try to put into words the emotions of the British people.
Tonight's accident is a terrible tragedy. The death of the Princess of Wales fills us all with deep shock and with deep grief. And our thoughts and our prayers are with her family and her friends, and with the family and friends of the others who died in the accident.
7 photographers have been arrested by French police and are being questioned about what happened. Their motorcycles are also being examined by the police, who will want to know exactly how the Princess's car crashed and what speeds were being driven. The French authorities have confirmed that this is a criminal investigation and evidence is being gathered from the scene with a view to possible prosecution. The response from ordinary French men and women was heartfelt and immediate. Flowers were laid by the roadside, where for many people in many countries, one of the world's brightest lights was extinguished. This evening, the body of Diana, Princess of Wales, left Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. The coffin, draped in the Royal Standard, will be flown back to RAF Northolt in West London, where it's expected to arrive in about an hour's time. Prince Charles had flown to Paris with Diana's 2 sisters to collect the body. They'd all received the condolences of the French nation from President Chirac himself. Soon the British people will have their chance to pay their last respects to the woman who inspired such extraordinary emotions here. Neil Bennett, BBC News.
There's been a huge outpouring of grief, not just in Britain but around the world, at the Princess's death. Here the Prime Minister Tony Blair said she would be remembered with the deepest love and affection, and tributes have been flooding in throughout the day from all over the world. David Loyne reports.
The royal family, led by the Queen, went to church as usual near Balmoral this morning. A small crowd had gathered to pay their respects. The Prince of Wales broke the news to his 2 sons, Prince William and Harry, early this morning. The man who married the Prince and Princess of Wales and baptised the two princes is the now retired Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Robert Runcie.
My memories are all happy, and so far as Diana is concerned, a great sense of her eagerness to be up to it, and having to assure her that she was up to it, and a real tender desire to be what everybody expected of her.
On his way to church with his family in his Sedgefield constituency, the Prime Minister led political reactions to the death.
I feel like everyone else in this country today, utterly devastated. Our thoughts and prayers are with Princess Diana's family, in particular her two sons, the two boys. Our hearts go out to them. We are today a nation in Britain in a state of shock, in mourning, in grief that is so deeply painful for us.
She was a unique and very lively and attractive individual, and so people will feel a personal sense of loss. But of course we should also pay tribute today to the tremendous work that she did for people involved with drugs, people with AIDS and other diseases, for homeless people, for young people in general.
It's one of shock and horror. Our thoughts and our prayers and our first considerations must be for her family, the Prince of Wales, her wider family. Beyond that, she brought light and compassion to our life and much else as well, and that light has now gone out.
Outside Buckingham Palace, where Diana knew she would never live as Queen, there was real emotion, fulfilling perhaps her hope that she was Queen in people's hearts.
Everybody loved Diana. I think the world has lost a very beautiful, witty, clever and charming young lady, and I'm devastated.
Seems such a sad waste, such a troubled life, and just all gone.
Religious leaders are still trying to make sense of a life cut short in such a dramatic way.
She had a faith in God, although she wasn't the kind of person who wore religion on her sleeves. There was a deep faith there going on. And her relationship with Mother Teresa, for example, was one of the she spoke to me about. So we cope, I think, by holding on to the things that she believed in. I think in many ways she had quite a lot of sadness in her life, but she will be remembered by the very considerable amount of good which she did. And I'm thinking not only recently on the question of landmines, but on the question also of the homeless, especially the young homeless.
President Mandela spoke for many world leaders, saying Diana was the best ambassador Britain had.
The fact that countries like South Africa, like Mozambique, as well as Angola, have decided to abolish landmines is due to a very large extent to her intervention.
Whatever the form national mourning now takes, thousands of people are already remembering the Princess of Wales in their own way. David Loyne, BBC News.
The plane bringing Diana's body home is due to touch down at RAF Northolt within the hour. Indeed, it took off from Paris about 5 minutes ago. Also on board are Prince Charles and Diana's two sisters. Joining us from RAF Northolt in West London is our correspondent Brian Hanrahan.
Peter, we do expect the plane to be touching down here in just under an hour's time. The timings are not exact because no one has had time to prepare a proper reception. This is very much a case of working according to the contingency plans which have existed over the years for members of the royal family dying while abroad. The Prime Minister, Mr. Blair, has already arrived. He flew in just a few minutes ago, and he has been joined by George Robertson, the Defence Secretary. Both of them have made a personal choice to attend the ceremonies here, which otherwise would be very simple indeed. There will be members of the RAF Colour Squadron, the Queen's Colour Squadron, will escort the coffin with wreaths,
and a coffin draped, we believe, probably in the Royal Standard, and accompanied by Prince Charles from the plane. Mr. Blair will be waiting on the tarmac to meet it, along with Mr. Robertson, and they will watch silently as a hearse takes the coffin away.
Brian, thank you very much. Well, President Clinton has interrupted his holiday to pay a public tribute to Diana, the Princess of Wales. He spoke of his deep sadness at her death, saying she was enormously popular in the United States.
Outside the British Embassy in Washington, a steady stream of Princess Diana's many followers in America come to pay tribute. It was the middle of the night when her death was first confirmed, and the first to come left lighted candles. Others marked their affection and grief with cards and even a poem. President Clinton was with his wife on an island off Massachusetts when he heard the news last night at a private party. This morning, breaking away from his holiday, on behalf of fellow Americans, he expressed his condolences to the people of the United Kingdom.
We liked her very much. We admired her work for children, for people with AIDS, for the cause of ending the scourge of landmines in the world, and for her love for her children, William and Harry. And I know that this is a very difficult time for millions of people in the United Kingdom who are deeply shocked and grieving. And the American people send their condolences to all of them.
Perhaps nowhere more than in the United States did the Princess of Wales capture the public's imagination. From her first visit as the young bride of the Prince of Wales, she quickly won celebrity status, the star of the show at President Reagan's White House when she danced with John Travolta. But it wasn't just her photogenic looks and stylish clothes that won her an adoring American public. Her work with children and the disadvantaged meant she was particularly welcome at the Clinton White House, guest of honour at a breakfast hosted by the First Lady last September, who called her one of the nicest British invasions. Today, news of her death has dominated news reports across the country, and nowhere more than in the centre of New York, a city where she was always greeted with enthusiasm.
She particularly liked New York City. She enjoyed coming here, and I think New Yorkers particularly loved her because of this caring and compassion that she had for people. The circumstances of her death, no matter what they would have been tragic. From everything that we can tell, it's even more tragic that she died in this way.
Here in the nation's capital, the mood has also been one of shock and bewilderment. She wasn't afraid to let people touch her, even those with leprosy and AIDS, was the way one woman put it. Everybody's going to miss her. For a nation that delights in informality, she was the perfect 20th century princess. Bridget Kendall, BBC News, Washington.
Word of Diana's death spread quickly in London. Prince William and Prince Harry learned of their mother's tragic death before dawn. Their father broke the news at the Royal Balmoral estate in Scotland, where they were vacationing. At the gates of Buckingham Palace, thousands of stunned mourners knelt and prayed and left flowers in memory of the Princess of Wales. CNN has more.
Outside Kensington Palace, Princess Diana's London home, the flowers began to arrive soon after dawn, and the tears began to flow. They came from far and wide, squeezing past the cameras, laying personal tributes at the foot of the royal gates. From the Middle East, Australia, Japan, Africa, and Germany. An endless list of nationalities paying their last respects.
And in the last few minutes, the coffin containing the body of the Princess of Wales has been put on board a plane in Paris, bound for Britain. A guard of honour stood by as the coffin was removed from the hearse covered by the Royal Standard. 8 servicemen from the Royal Air Force carried it towards the plane as French soldiers stood to attention. And our correspondent Robert Hall is in Paris now. Robert, we understand that a security detail who was in the car in which the princess died is in hospital without life-threatening injuries, and so he may be able to give a fuller picture of what went on in the early hours of this morning.
Yes, indeed he may. We've been getting a bit more detail about Trevor Rees-Jones. He's a bodyguard employed by the Al Fayed family who was travelling in the front of that vehicle. He has, as you say, serious injuries, serious facial injuries. He's in intensive care. His family are with him, but no, he's not on the danger list. He may be able to give more detail about what has become a rather confused incident. We've got these reports, as you've heard, of press photographers on motorbikes, either behind or around that car. Other witnesses say they saw no bikes. We may not know any more until the French police either prefer charges or issue a further statement.
Robert, what about those people who we understand earlier today were arrested and are still being held in connection with this incident, those photographers on motorbikes?
Well, that's right. There were 7 photographers altogether, 6 French photographers, 1 Macedonian. They were questioned throughout the day. Reports this afternoon suggested that 3 of them had been released, 4 were still being held. Now, even if the French don't prefer charges of either involuntary manslaughter or manslaughter, there is a charge under a sort of so-called Good Samaritan law, where people can actually be indicted for failing to help people in danger. So they may not be out of danger yet.
Not been told that for the moment, and indeed, of course, beyond that, the funeral arrangements are yet to be made. It's being stressed, incidentally, by Buckingham Palace that members of the family will be consulted, and we're not just talking about the royal family. We are, of course, talking about her grieving family, her brother, Earl Spencer, who spoke so passionately. And
now, just on that, we know that the Princess's 2 sisters are on board the plane. Earl Spencer is in South Africa, presumably making his way back now.
Yes, that's right. Well, he indeed, and he said today, you know, I believe the press would kill her in the end. Those words are going to ring down the ears, aren't they? And the plane stopped there just a little bit out of view over that ridge. And we're talking about this funeral, as I say, the consultation with the family, whether that means that there's a possibility that it won't be quite the major national event that might have been foreseen, I really can't say. I can't imagine, frankly, that it won't be. You remember we saw the coffin in Paris covered with the royal standard. That said it all. It is to be a full royal occasion.
As she is now brought home, we pray for her cherished sons, for Prince William and Prince Harry, for Charles, Prince of Wales, for Elizabeth, our Queen, and all the royal family, for her mother, her sisters and brother, for the family of Dodi Al Fayed, for her household and all who have known today the pain of grief and loss.
What has happened today is wherever there has been some thought of the presence of the princess returning perhaps even to Kensington Palace in her coffin, people have assembled, and there are, as we've seen, huge crowds outside Buckingham Palace, and they don't want a vast number of people descending on a private mortuary. So I suspect that they will make this as impersonal as possible, but at the same keep it reasonably private.
You were saying there that it's going to be a brief, maybe 5 minutes or so, ceremony. What does that entail, actually, Chris?
Well, we're told that Prince Charles will alight from the aircraft first of all, and he will be greeted by Tony Blair and also by George Robertson, the Secretary of State for Defence. It will be then a case of waiting for Diana's 2 sisters to alight from the plane, and then they will unload the coffin containing Diana's body.
The People's Princess is dead. Across the country, across the world, millions are trying to come to terms with the awful tragedy of Diana's untimely death. At midnight, the car carrying Diana and the new man in her life, Dodi Al Fayed, crashed as they were being chased through Paris by photographers.
And at the foot of the steps which have just been lowered, Bob, are one of the wreath carriers. He's carrying a huge wreath of flowers which will be put on top of the coffin as it is brought down the steps.
There's a closer shot, approaching the back of the plane. Just saw a wreath there, I think, caught a glimpse of some white lilies being carried past.
Of the news which we've been handling, reporting all day. This time, last night, was the beginning for the Princess of, by all accounts, another happy evening in what was said by her friends to be a new and extremely fulfilled and happy part of her life. But all snuffed out in a Paris underpass.
The British Prime Minister and the British Defence Secretary are both there. Earlier, the British Prime Minister looked very shocked indeed and said he was devastated by the death of the Princess. And in fact, he said he'd even spoken to her not long ago, and she seemed very happy with her new life, and especially with that new companionship she'd found with Dodi Al Fayed.
For it now, there is a thought that it will be a substantial funeral, befitting someone who was so dearly loved by this country, and you've seen those extraordinary outpourings of grief.
And we have seen the Prince of Wales and the two sisters as they came from the plane.
I'm told he is there.
Something, yes. And so to the back of the hearse.
The body of Diana, Princess of Wales, arrives back on British soil. Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, is there, along with George Robertson, the Defence Secretary. We saw earlier today a very emotional speech from Tony Blair about Princess Diana's qualities. He was at times near to tears.
And the Princess's two sisters will be accompanying the coffin.
The car immediately behind the hearse, yes, to follow on in a grim cortege.
That is one of the royal cars, is it not, Nick?
Yes.
One of the fleet of royal cars,
yep,
which shows that from the very beginning, from her return to this country, she's been treated as a member of the royal family.
Yes. Now, Nick, do we suspect that the Prince will actually stay at Northolt and fly on up now to Balmoral to be with his sons?
I presume so, Dermot. I have to say I can't quite see him in that group now, but whether he's moved slightly to one side.
He didn't seem to get into
that car, no.
With Diana's sisters.
And at times seemed bewitched. A mixture of happiness and sadness. Flag there at half-mast, and on the road into London many of the flagpoles of the factories are also at half-mast as people wait to watch the coffin go past. Prince Charles talking to the Prime Minister, who made a personal decision to come to this ceremony, who spoke so movingly this morning of the people's princess, who will stay in our hearts forever. He, of course, came down from Aberdeen